Hey everyone, Tankenstein here, and welcome to your Warthunder Aircraft Iceberg. In this video, I'll be giving you some aircraft concepts and some other things related to Warthunder aircraft, and going from the most common at the very tip of the iceberg all the way down to the lesser known things, at least what I consider to be the lesser known things, at the very bottom of the iceberg. It'll be a pretty standard iceberg video with things that I've gained over about the 10 years I've been playing this game, and it's been a little bit more than 10 years because I think I played it before the game fully came out. But that being said, let's get into it, and let's start off at the very tip of the iceberg here. And again, a lot of these will be aircraft, but I'll also be going over some concepts, some memes as well, and some other various things that have happened throughout the history of Warthunder. That said, to start, we have the P-51. Now, of course, obviously, everyone knows about the P-51 Mustang. There are so many variants of this and so many tech trees. Of course, this is going to be at the very tip of the iceberg. Same goes with the Spitfire. Tons of variants of the Spitfire, very well known. You could also lump in the Hurricanes there, and also the BF-109 as well. All of these are at the very tip of the iceberg. The Zero, FW-190, P-47, all of them. Now, you also have reserve planes as well. Now, these are pretty much just kind of grouped into a single category because most people don't really recognize reserve planes as their own individual planes, or rather it's just kind of this generic category in which to group together aircraft. They all more or less function about the same. Of course, you're going to have some reserve planes that are a little bit better and some that are a little bit worse, but more or less they're all about the same. They have very limited capabilities, they're pretty much generic, and they're very slow, lightly armored, lightly armed. You know how it is. Now moving forward, let's get into the A-10. Now the A-10 is something that was hyped up so damn much in War Thunder. This plane was hyped up for years. People didn't think it was going to come, then people thought it was going to come, and then it finally got announced, and boom, got to War Thunder and is one of the most heavily played aircraft in top tier today. Next up, we have the F-14. Again, another incredibly hyped aircraft, probably more hyped than the A-10, and might even be the most hyped aircraft in the history of War Thunder. Next up, we have high tier premiums. High tier premiums, I mean, of course, the A-10 is a high tier premium, but you have two different variants of the A-10. Specifically, what I'm referring to are going to be the F-5C, the Harrier GR1, AV-8A, things of that nature. A-5C, you guys know the deal. Just a lot of high tier premiums. You will get matches in high tier where pretty much 50, 60, 70% of players, if not more, have had many matches where literally everybody, except for myself, sometimes even myself, we're all playing in high tier premium vehicles. Just how the world works at top tier. Next up, we have MiGs and Sabres. Of course, the classic clash of the West versus East in terms of aircraft. You have the MiG-15 and the Sabres, and MiG-17s as well, you could say. MiG-19s, you could even extend it to MiG-21s, 23s, and who's to say we're not going to be getting the MiG-25 and 29 soon? Not that I know, because I don't, but of course, MiGs and Sabres, very, very well known. And finally, kind of at the lower portion of the very top of the upper tip is going to be the Yaki Yaks. There are so many Yaks in game, and they are probably going to be the most common Russian aircraft in game, outside of course, the MiGs. Next up, we have the next level. This is kind of where the iceberg actually starts, physically starts, and I'll start off with the ME-262. Now, the ME-262, of course, everybody knows the ME-262, but it's not as popular as, let's say, the P-51, BF-109, the Zero, and all that. And I think simply it's just because there are fewer variants of the ME-262. As far as jets are concerned, early jets, it's one of the most popular, but of course, that's why it's kind of straddling the line between the above the tip and the tip of the iceberg. Next, we have the HO-229. Who doesn't love that? That's Germany's UFO. Everybody knows it. It is a very iconic aircraft in War Thunder. Beyond this, we have captured vehicles. Almost every tech tree has a version of a captured vehicle. I know the US, for example, has the BF-109 F4. Germany has several. Japan has the captured B-17. There are just so many examples of captured aircraft in game that you could not mention this. But of course, most of the time these are premium and thus are slightly lesser known or lesser played than you're going to get at, again, the very top of this list. Next, we have squadron aircraft. Pretty similar, except of course, these are kind of unique aircraft that you will get. ME-262A1U1, you have the Firecrest for Great Britain, and it's just kind of a whole smattering of aircraft. As of the making of this video, there aren't a ton of aircraft squadron vehicles, but I'm sure more and more will be coming in the near future. Next, we have the B-29 repair cost. Of course, the B-29 repair cost, if I'm not mistaken, has dropped substantially over the last year or two. However, this is more indicative of a meme that kind of has gone around just insofar as repair costs are concerned. There are some aircraft, especially bombers, that just have such an incredibly prohibitive repair cost that it makes them almost unusable, because if you get shot down, which most of the time you will, especially once jets are in play, there's really nothing you can do about it, and it's just a money sink. Beyond this, we have boom and zoom. This is, of course, a very popular tactic, especially when it comes to heavier German aircraft, and you just kind of go up in the sky, swoop down on enemies, and hope that you take out 1, 2, or 3 at a time. So it's a pretty common tactic for aircraft, but of course, this is kind of one of those concepts I was talking about. Next, we have wing rip. Of course, who doesn't know wing rip? This is not really as common. I mean, if you are a brand new player, you're not going to know this, as opposed to somebody might say, oh, well, I know the reserve aircraft, the BF-109, F-14, but once you actually start getting into it and you play RB, wing rip will be very common, especially if you play something like the Skyray, which a lot of noobs at this point play. Next up, we have the Battle Pass aircraft, which is pretty much on the same level as the squadron aircraft. There are a few of these, like the BV-155 for Germany, the F-6C for the French, as well as a French P-39. All pretty good aircraft, typically pretty low BR. You also have the Super Corsair as well in there, which is a fantastic squadron vehicle, and if it wasn't in Season 1, I'm sure Gaijin would have made that a top-level Battle Pass reward, but of course, it seems like they gave everybody exactly what they wanted in Season 1, and every season has kind of gone down since then. Either way, next up, we have head-ons. Head-ons, another tactic in War Thunder. This is something a lot of people do, especially when it comes to heavier, more nose-mounted armaments. Head-ons are a very popular tactic. Most people play chicken with it, and they get away at the last second, but other people just kind of pursue the head-on and keep at it and do a full head-on. Just simply put, it is a tactic where you run head-on to your enemy and you shoot at them with your cannons, MGs, whatever ordnance you have. And finally, in this tier, we have crashing into the ground due to packet loss. This has been something, at least as of recently, as of the recording of this video, has been very, very common, and what'll happen is you take off, all of a sudden there is some sort of server lag, maybe a DDoS attack, and you crash into the ground, and thus you have a lot of repair bills, and you also don't get to crew your vehicle at least for another 5, 6, 7 minutes a lot of the time. Okay, now we're starting to get under the water here. So let's start off with event aircraft. Now this is something, of course, this is kind of like the squadron aircraft, battle pass aircraft, except now with event aircraft, for the most part, you only have one chance to get them. Otherwise, you have to either get them in a crate after the fact, or you can get them on the marketplace. Either way, these are limited availability aircraft, like the F-11 F1 Tiger, for example, the Buccaneer S1, and a few more. So these are pretty uncommon aircraft. Next up, we have bomber cockpits. Of course, if you guys know, if you guys have ever played bombers and you try to check out the cockpit, for the most part, they are totally unfinished and they look like a game out of 2000. Next up, we have space climbing. So space climbing, this is a tactic typically used by early jet players, early jet bombers, or B-29s, things of that nature. You used to see it a lot with the Arado 234C variant, but of course, now that BR's increased, so have the capabilities of the aircraft fighting it, and thus their rates of climb have increased, but you still have space climbing. Used to be much more of a meme than it is now, but of course space climbing is a thing with bombers and some fighter aircraft that decide to be jerks and really make a match last way too long. Next up, we have all aspect missiles, and what all aspect missiles are, simply, typically this is referring to a thermal or an infrared missile that tracks onto the heat signature of an aircraft, but if it's all aspect, that means that you can actually lock onto them when they are facing you rather than going away from you, where you could normally track onto their hot edge and exhaust. Typically, there is a lesser lock range when they are facing you. So, of course, let's say if you have a 5.5 kilometer lock range from behind, you might have a 1.5 or 2.5 kilometer lock range from in front. But these are very, very powerful missiles, typically very advanced with a very good amount of G overload. Next up, we have ramming. Ramming, when I first started playing in like 2012, I think it was, July 2012, it was such a problem because people would literally just ram into you. That was it. I don't really see that as much anymore. Of course, ramming is more of an issue or more of a byproduct that happens after a full-on head-on, but of course, ramming does end up being somewhat of an issue, but not nearly as much, especially now that bombers or aircraft, when you crash into the ground, I don't believe that you actually can kill a tank anymore. You might be able to, but back in the day, if I'm not mistaken, you used to be able to, and that was also considered ramming. Next up, we have base camping, which is a passive playstyle, which, by the way, is against Warthunder rules. So if you ever see somebody base camping, meaning that they are just kind of hovering around their base, waiting for people to be killed by the flak or the missiles, protecting their base, that is actually a punishable offense in Warthunder, and you can report that player. But pretty much, again, this is just when you're either sitting on your base or hovering really closely to it in order to draw enemies in and make them die to your SPAA or flak, then just kind of win the game like that without you actually doing anything, but rather just kind of forcing them to go after you in a place where they're going to die. This kind of leads to my next one, which is SPAA/Airfield AA, too strong. Of course, if you guys know, you once you get too close to an enemy airfield, there is nothing you can do about it. You pretty much either have to bomb them from like 5,000-6,000 meters up, or just kind of make a really low pass and hope that you can get in. Occasionally, you will be able to actually get into the enemy base, but if you are trying to kill that base camper, it is not going to happen for the most part, just because SPAA will wipe you out. And much the same when it comes to ground RB. SPAA, they get one shot on you, or like a Tunguska hits you, you are done for. It doesn't matter what you have, you are going to die. Okay, so we are nearing the end of this portion of the iceberg, but we have not bringing enough fuel. So this is not typically going to be a problem when it comes to prop planes or lower BR aircraft, but once you start getting into higher BR aircraft, especially when it comes to afterburners, this becomes a problem, because you might have 7, 8, 9 minutes of fuel for your aircraft with a minimum fuel load, and a lot of the time minimum fuel load seems like a good idea because it's the least weight that you can carry into a match, thus you can be more maneuverable, have better acceleration, so on and so forth. But if you get stuck in an operation match and you forget to put more fuel in your plane, guess what? You're going to crash before you even get to the fight. So it's not a fun thing, and it's an extra game mechanic, albeit a realistic one that you really have to watch out for, especially when it comes to some Swedish aircraft that drink fuel like it is water. Beyond this, we have crazy BRs in AB. We have something like the KI-87 High, if I'm not mistaken, that has a 7.7 BR in AB, despite the fact that it is a prop plane. You have the A2D1, which is 9.0 in air AB. You have the F-86-35, the Skyblazer Sabre, which is a 7.3 BR Tier 5 aircraft in AB, whereas again, the A2D1 is Tier 4, despite being 9.0 BR. So there are some really wonky BRs in AB, and I really suggest you guys check it out because it is interesting to say the least. Next up, kind of related, we have BR compression. Now, BR compression is something that really plagues top tier, especially when you can have aircraft at 8.0 BR, 8.3 BR that have missiles, albeit typically very much weak missiles with very good performance, and their counterparts, their enemies, don't have anything, and they have even lesser performance. You have something like, for example, the F2H2 Banshee, which has pretty decent maneuverability stats and all that at 8.0 BR, but the Su-11 that has the same stats at 7.0 BR. And, you know, I can make so many examples of this, but pretty much it's when you have a lot of aircraft that just simply become uncompetitive because Gaijin is not willing to raise the BR cap and thus kind of decompress some of these BRs because, of course, once you start putting in, for example, F-14s, A-10s with all-aspect missiles, Su-25Ks with all-aspect missiles into these 10.0, 9.7 BR ranges, and then you start facing enemies that don't even have countermeasures, they are going to dominate. Okay, so let's get onto the line here of the next portion of the iceberg. So we have the old P-47D. Before we have the P-47D that we actually currently have, which is the Razorback that you can purchase in the German air tech tree, the premium. The old one was the bubble top. I believe it was just listed as the P-47D, and it is a unique variant of it. It's no longer available for purchase. If you have it, you have it, but it is considered a hidden vehicle vehicle and is again no longer obtainable. Next, we have the BF-109Z. If this was maybe about a year ago, I would have put this a little bit further down in the iceberg, but recently Warthunder did make it available for purchase on a limited time. So it is still available, but still pretty uncommon and not something that many people see, especially if you don't keep up with the news or if you play in mid-tier Air RB typically. And then finally, we have carriers coming to Warthunder. And of course, this is something that Warthunder has stated many times for a long time in the past. They said, yes, carriers will be coming. And to an extent, they also said that there will be full game modes where you have air, ground, and naval all duking it out against each other, but we have yet to see that. And carriers, especially, we get the occasional match where you start off on a carrier, but there's virtually no real interaction with carriers except for the occasional, essentially starting airfield that you get, again, in some rare matches in Air RB. And now we are descending further into the depths, and if you guys have been sticking with me up through now, thank you so much, but let's get into it. First off, we have an aircraft that many people might think that you know, but really you might not, because the XP-38G is actually not a real aircraft, and it was given in Warthunder, but is no longer available for purchase. It was a premium vehicle that you could actually purchase, and what happened was in 2020, late 2020, it was removed from the game and is again a hidden vehicle in Warthunder, and is, in my opinion, a little bit more rare than the old P-47D because it did have a pack vehicle status and was a lower BR pack vehicle, so it wasn't really as obvious to many people to purchase like the old P-47D may have been, because that was always on people's tech trees. Next, we have Twitch drop vehicles, and this one is kind of unusual because a lot of people do not really follow the news for Warthunder, and to their credit, Warthunder doesn't really publish news about Twitch drops as well as they should. There have been some times where people don't even know that Twitch drops are happening on a given weekend or any given period of time, but of course they do happen. And Twitch drop vehicles are pretty much when you just watch somebody's Twitch stream, and after, let's say, 1, 2, 3 hours of watching, you get a reward, and occasionally Warthunder gives vehicles. And there is a P40E1 TD Twitch drop that is available, or at least was available. I actually have it, but I don't know if I've seen anyone ever use it. I know I've never even used it, but it is a fairly uncommon vehicle and is pretty damn rare. Next up, we have the PO2. Now, this one I would have put a little bit lower in this list, and I even have a feeling that I probably should have put it a little bit higher because recently it was brought back to the game, at least into the form of the PO2M, but pretty much this was an original biplane in Warthunder and was eventually removed because of how slow it is, and it was jokingly referred to as the OP2. So it was a pretty interesting aircraft, and again, it's been brought back to Warthunder, but this is something that very few people have, and yearly, more or less, Gaijin gives them out, about 1,000 of them every year during the Halloween event, but beyond that, it is still a very uncommon aircraft. One, because not many people have them, but the people who have them don't really play them because they're not good. Next up, we have the rare marketplace planes. So we have planes like the HE-162A1, the ME-262A2A, P-40C, etc. Now, a lot of these aircraft you might not even take a second look at in Warthunder when you're actually in a match, especially for people who are more casual to this game, because you might not know that they're rare, because in game we have the HE-162A2 as a regular variant, the ME-262A1A as a regular variant, the P-40E, for example, as a regular variant. All these are attainable in the regular tech tree, but the HE-262A1 is a very rare aircraft, not even available on the marketplace as of the recording of this video. It is a very powerful version of the Salamander with 30mm cannons. The A2A is actually the first version of the ME-262 that could carry bombs. Plus, it has a lower BR and also only has two 30mm cannons as opposed to 4. So pretty interesting aircraft, again, very rare. Next up, we have the BF-109 G2 Sucks. This is more of a content creator meme that some of you might know from a few years ago, but in short, a content creator, and I'm not making fun of you here, it's just kind of an interesting, funny thing to note, but there was a content creator that said that the BF-109 G2 sucked and got jumped on for saying that, and that video is still on YouTube, so if you want to check it out, you definitely can. But yeah, the BF-109 G2 does not suck. It was just kind of an odd opinion video. Next up, we have Stalinium, and basically back in the day, this was a huge meme. I'm sure it's still a meme to a point, but mostly old timers, relatively speaking, in War Thunder will know about this. But pretty much you would have it where people who had Russian aircraft would just ram their wings through other aircraft and it would totally annihilate the other aircraft, but the Russian aircraft that you're piloting would come out okay. And, it was almost kind of like they had this coating of paint of just armor on their aircraft that didn't weigh them down, but stopped bullets from damaging them, from cannons from damaging them, and it basically turned them into an aerial wrecking ball. And thus it was called Stalinium because, of course, they had the blessing of Stalin. Next, we have something that caused a lot of controversy: the Harrier GR1 at 9.3 VR. So when the Harrier GR1 was first released, I believe it was around 2 years ago as of the release of this video, it came out, I believe, at 9.3 BR. May have been at 9.0 BR, but 9.3 BR. And this aircraft totally dominated everybody. Imagine SRAMs at 9.3 BR. There were so many people who just bought it and there were people that I saw that had literally played hundreds of matches with the Harrier GR1 in the first 2 or 3 days of having it. And eventually, I believe it was within about a week, Gaijin increased the BR of it to 9.7, and then again a few weeks or a few months later to 10.0 BR, which is where it currently sits. But for a short while, the Harrier GR1 was the most busted aircraft in all of War Thunder. It was ridiculous. Imagine the T-72 AV terms when that first came out, times like 10. Okay, so we are getting a little bit lower in the iceberg, almost at the very bottom here. First off, we have the SM-79, the bombers for Germany. Now, these aircraft are actually Italian bombers, but before the Italian air tech tree was introduced, you could also say like the CR-32, 42 and all that as well, but more so with the bombers, these are more, I guess, rare. They were in the German air tech tree fairly low in BR. And the thing about them was that you only really needed to get 1 or 2 of them in order to progress your tech tree. So if you got every single one of the SM-79 bombers, which I actually have most of them, I think I've got like 5 out of 7, then it is incredibly rare. And I guess there are people willing to purchase accounts with all of those bombers for hundreds of dollars. So it's a very rare thing to see anybody in an SM-79 bomber in Germany. But as you get further down into the line of the more advanced SM-79 bombers for Germany, they become more and more rare. So you will almost never see these bombers, especially the top level of the bombers that Germany once had. But these are no longer German aircraft and have been given to the Italians. So the only people who actually have them for Germany, again, are those who actually got them originally before, again, they were brought over to Italy. So no new accounts have these aircraft. Next, we have the overpowered PO2. This one I kind of consider putting a lot higher on the list, and I think that probably should, but I didn't really see a ton of people playing this mode, and this is pretty much going to be one of those things that people look back at and say, oh yeah, that happened. Pretty much this is when in the overpowered crafting event, they give you the ability to jump into an overpowered PO2 and shoot down enemies trying to attack you with this ridiculously powerful cannon on the back of it. So pretty cool game mode, but it was essentially a nothing game mode, just kind of meant to occupy your time and just be kind of an unusual way to spend your time in War Thunder. Next up, we have other hidden aircraft in War Thunder. So the PE-2-205, Gladiator Mark II-F, etc. Pretty much, and I'll try to link Ash's video in the description below. Ash actually has a really good video on this where he kind of shows most, if not all, of the hidden vehicles, aircraft in War Thunder, but essentially there were just a whole bunch of aircraft that were available at one point, typically around the time that the beta was released, but before like update 1.4-ish, a lot of these were around, and then they were just removed from the game. So the PE-2-205, again, is one of those rare ones. The Gladiator Mark II-F, very rare aircraft, but again, Ash has a very complete video on that below with a lot of those aircraft, and it's very interesting to see what was once in-game, but is no longer. Next, we have the BI, or the BI, or however it's pronounced. This is the Russian rocket plane that was given as a reward during a crafting event, if I'm not mistaken, and this is a very rare aircraft, typically sells for hundreds of dollars on the marketplace. Pretty much, it's like the Comet times like a million because it goes so fast that in a straight line, it will break apart. This plane is absolutely ridiculous, and it's just one of those really rare aircraft that you see people either dominating in or just being ripped apart by the stresses of air going against it because of how fast it goes and the fact that it doesn't have stellenium to bless it. Next, we have the TU-2, or the Tupolev-2. Now, a lot of people might be saying to themselves, what? The Tupolev-2? That's in-game. Variants of the Tupolev-2 are in-game, but the actual Tupolev 2 is incredibly rare, and it is actually one of those aircraft, and typically I would just include this in the other hidden aircraft section, but the reason why I put this here as its own separate beast is because everybody thinks the Tupolev 2, this is a very common aircraft to see in the low to mid BRs, but no, the Tupolev 2, not the Tupolev 2S or any of the other variants, is so incredibly rare that most people probably have never seen it in game. This is a vehicle that was only given out during the closed beta test, so anybody who actually participated in the closed beta test has this, so anyone 2013 and before who unlocked it, I never did, but the Tupolev 2, again, incredibly rare aircraft, believe it or not, and is something that even I cannot get whenever I ask Gaijin for a test drive of it, and being that I'm a content creator, I can ask for test drives, but this is so incredibly rare that they will not let me touch it. Next up, we have campaign missions, and campaign missions. A lot of people look at Warthunder as a single player game. This one I probably should have put a little bit higher on the iceberg, but most people do not know that there are campaign missions available in Warthunder, but you have to purchase them via campaign packs. I would strongly suggest getting the Japanese pack for the campaigns because it has some really interesting historical missions. Plus, you can get the, I believe it's the A6M6 Co, which is an incredibly good premium aircraft, plus you get 850 GE, all for $15. So it's a really, really nice deal that you get, and especially when it's on sale, I mean, it cannot be beaten. This is a really good deal, has a lot of awesome missions for you to play, and make War Thunder an actually single-player game. Next, we have tournament planes, and these planes are very rare aircraft that you could only have gotten via tournaments, like the P-51A, actually an incredibly rare aircraft with a black and red camo. You could also get the A-26 C-45, which was given out during some sort of a quiz like 10 years ago. So very rare aircraft. And also, I guess there's a content creator, I believe it's Orange Doom, that has the Super Mystere B2 Cup Edition, and he is the only War Thunder content creator that actually has it. So some of these aircraft are extremely rare and are not something that you will probably ever see during your time of playing War Thunder. Now, with that said, we are getting into the depths of the War Thunder airplane iceberg. And first off, we have something that kind of straddles the line between the area we were just in and what we're about to enter, and that is going to be the old War Thunder roadmaps. So back in the day, back in like 2012, 2013, and I actually released a video on this, but pretty much Gaijin released a bunch of roadmaps saying that they plan on releasing X, Y, and Z aircraft, and a lot of these aircraft were actually never introduced to game. For example, aircraft that I really want coming to War Thunder, the Me-262 HG-1 and HG-2, were mentioned as the roadmaps as being likely additions to War Thunder in the future, but that never happened, and there are plenty of aircraft that actually never came to War Thunder that they said would, and this was like 10 years ago. So you have to wonder if they're ever going to come to War Thunder, if they're not, but this is something that, again, they released as kind of a public-facing plan to show off exactly where they're going to go with War Thunder, and a lot of it has not happened yet, even 10 years later. So next up, we are in the actual depths of the War Thunder iceberg. We have the Tandem MAI. This is possibly one of the rarest vehicles that you're ever going to see, or probably never going to see in War Thunder. I had the luxury of being able to actually use this in a test drive in a few matches a few years ago, but long story short, this aircraft is terrible. It is an incredibly unique looking aircraft, but it is just not good, and it is more or less considered a strike aircraft for the Russians. Very low BR, I believe it's around 2.0 BR in RB, and it's just really, really strange. Next, we have UFOs, and there were UFOs in War Thunder. This was during an April Fool's event back a few years ago where Gaijin basically gave everybody access to UFOs to be able to shoot down other UFOs, to go into a city and destroy players. It was a really, really hectic event, but it was a very interesting event, and definitely one that a few people remember, of course, but isn't really looked upon and remembered as well as a lot of other events. We are nearing the end here, so beyond this we have Gaijilla. This was an event in 2014 where pretty much there was a gigantic electric snail that was rampaging through the streets of Tokyo, I believe, and you had to destroy it with aircraft. Really, really cool event, and something that has not been done ever since. It was basically a gigantic boss fight where you all had to work together to destroy this gigantic rampaging monster, and it was set to coincide with the release of the movie Godzilla that same year. So pretty cool. Probably should be a little bit higher in this map, but it's not. Next up, we have the Flying Ponies. This is another event. This was actually the first April Fool's event. Came out in 2013, and pretty much it was just where they would give you a bunch of flying ponies. They pretty much were like jets in terms of how they performed, and you would just shoot other players down. It was a pretty cool thing, but more or less it was just kind of skins on jet aircraft. And then next up, we have the Li-2 and Ju-52. Now these are transport aircraft that were introduced into War Thunder, but they are NPCs, hidden vehicles, and there are actually other things that you could check out in Ash's video because they are shown in there. But these are incredibly rough models in game. They look like they were made before the game was even released. Like somebody made them and decided not to polish them, but they are still in game, and you could check them out. Again, if you want, check out Ash's video. I'll try to put it in the description below. And finally, Italy. Italy is at the bottom of this iceberg because absolutely nobody plays Italy. Not even the fantastic Ariete, which is an amazing premium gunfighter. Nobody plays it, and it is a damn shame. Heck, I don't even know if Italy really exists with how many people play it. But that said, please let me know what you guys think in the comments below. This video lasted around 10-15 minutes, maybe even 20 minutes longer than I expected. But of course, a good iceberg video will typically last somewhere around 30 minutes. So maybe I'm actually not coming in at a bad time. Either way, thanks so much again, guys, and I will see you all on the other side. Take care, everyone.